The twin suns of Veltraxis burned above the arena, casting long shadows over the silver sand where warriors from across the galaxy gathered. They came in towering armor, scales glistening, cybernetic eyes gleaming, each a champion of their world, ready to claim the royal boon promised by Princess Talira. At the edge of this glittering chaos stood a lone human commander, Elias Wren. No armor, no glowing weapons, just a dark gray uniform, a holster with an antique sidearm, and a calm expression that drew curious looks and quiet laughs. Humans were still new to the galactic concord, known more for persistence than prowess. No one expected him to last more than an hour in the Crucible, a multi-phase trial built to test mind, body, and soul. Talira watched from her crystal throne. Above, her violet eyes flickering with something unreadable as the countdown began. With a deafening boom, the first trial launched. Survive the skies. The arena shifted, transforming into a broken cityscape floating on hovering platforms, filled with robotic predators, shifting terrain, and deadly traps. Elias moved fast but smart. He didn't charge like the Carnian berserker, or take to the skies like the Helvethi wingborn. Instead, he ducked into shadows, studied patterns, used debris for cover. Where others trusted brute strength or ancient instincts, Elias trusted logic, timing, and observation. One by one, the flashier champions fell tripped by overconfidence, by traps they didn't see, by enemies they underestimated. A Vrexian warlord fell into a gravity well. A telepath screamed as his mind was overwhelmed by a feedback field. Elias found a broken turret, reprogrammed it to distract a swarm of drones, then slipped past them silently. He never attacked unless necessary, and when he did, it was precise, a stun bolt, a tripwire, a tossed fragment to create noise and confusion. Hours passed, and fewer competitors remained. The audience, at first dismissive, began to murmur. The human was still alive, not just surviving, but adapting. Talira leaned forward, watching him with a faint smile. The final hour of the trial brought a new twist. All remaining participants were herded toward the central platform, forced into one arena. The Carnian, bleeding but wild-eyed, roared a challenge. The wingborn, battered and proud, spread her wings, lightning crackling. At her fingertips, Elias, dusty and bruised, simply crouched behind a pillar, listening. When the Carnian lunged for him, Elias led him on a chase, dodging through wreckage until the brute tripped a still active trap, an energy snare that left him stunned. The wingborn struck next, fast as wind, but Elias was faster in thought. He reflected her own blast using a shard of mirror alloy. She collapsed, gasping as he stepped back, offering no final blow. Instead, he stood alone as the countdown ended. Silence fell. The arena dissolved, and the survivors, only one, now stood blinking under the twin suns again. The announcer's voice trembled as it declared, "The victor of the first trial, Commander Elias Wren of Earth." Gasps followed, murmurs, confusion. In the royal box, nobles exchanged looks of disbelief. A human? Princess Talira rose, descending the stairs with royal grace. She approached Elias, whose eyes met hers calmly. "You didn't kill when you could have," she said softly. "Why?" Elias shrugged slightly. "Because this wasn't a war. It was a test." Her gaze lingered on him, then she turned to the crowd. "Let all bear witness. she declared. "The human has passed the first trial with honor." Shock rippled through the court. As Elias walked away with the other remaining contestants, now wary of him, no one knew what stunned them more, that he won without violence, or that the princess smiled as he left. The next trial loomed, but the mystery had already begun. Why was this human different? And why did the princess look at him as if she already knew something the rest of them didn't? The cold light of morning fell over the hall of trials, where only a few contestants remained from the brutal first test, their faces hard, their eyes wary, but none more closely watched than Elias Wren, the quiet human who had stunned the galaxy by surviving without bloodshed. Now he stood again among beings twice his size, some with wings, others with silver skin or glowing eyes, yet all looked at him differently, with caution and perhaps a trace of fear, as the second trial was announced. The puzzle of the immortal flame. They were led into a vast chamber made of living stone, pulsing faintly with warmth and light, its walls filled with moving symbols and strange glowing vines that reacted to sound and touch. The rules were simple, yet mysterious. Find the immortal flame at the heart of the temple and unlock it together, or all would be trapped when the structure collapsed in 6 hours. Elias was paired with 2 other contestants, a Hegrin warrior named Braca, all muscle and fury, who wore heavy armor and spoke in short, angry bursts, and a Varnathi tactician called Sirud, a slender creature with 6 glittering eyes and a mind like a machine, always calculating. From the beginning they clashed. Braca demanded to smash through walls. Siriel insisted on following logic and code patterns, while Elias watched in silence, noting how the temple shifted subtly each time they fought, how the walls darkened when voices rose, how the light dimmed when frustration filled the air. Hours passed, and they made little progress. Puzzles reset, doors sealed again, and the flame stayed out of reach. The floor beneath them cracked slowly, heat rising from below, a sign that time was running out. Siriel grew impatient, tapping constantly on her device, muttering equations, while Braca struck at the walls in rage, denting metal with his fists. But Elias knelt by a panel none had noticed, placing a hand on its smooth surface. It glowed faintly beneath his fingers. "This temple doesn't respond to strength," he said quietly, "or to logic alone. It reacts to intention, how we treat each other." The others scoffed, but Elias proved it by showing them how soft voices caused certain walls to open, how gestures of peace brightened the floor beneath their feet, and how working in rhythm, rather than opposition, moved them forward. Slowly they began to listen. At a great gate sealed by fire, Elias asked Braca to lower his weapon, and Siriel to stop calculating probabilities. Instead, he told them a story about a human ship that once floated through deep space with failing systems, and how its crew survived not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they trusted each other. The fire cooled, and the gate opened. Inside the final chamber stood the immortal flame, floating above a pool of light, but it flickered and dimmed when Siriel stepped forward to claim it. Confused, she turned to Elias. He approached the flame, not to take it, but to bow before. "This flame isn't a prize," he said. "It's a mirror. It reflects who we are." Only when all 3 knelt before it together did the flame flare brightly, stabilizing the entire temple. The walls ceased to crack, The ground grew cool, and a voice rang out from the ceiling, trial complete. They were transported back to the royal hall, where nobles leaned forward in disbelief. Another test passed, another human success. Princess Talira stood again, her face unreadable, though her eyes remained fixed on Elias as he returned to the others. The crowd whispered, some angry, others intrigued, and still others simply stunned that a species once considered too simple had now solved a puzzle built to test the soul. As Elias walked away, he could feel the stares burning into his back, but the only one that mattered was hers, the quiet, knowing look of someone who saw more than power or fame, who saw something rare in the vast cold of the stars, someone who had begun to understand why this human might matter more than anyone realized. Veltraxis glittered under a pale green sky as word of Elias Wren's second victory spread like wildfire through the marble halls and hovering towers of the royal court, and though no bells rang and no banners flew, his name was now spoken in every chamber, whispered by noble tongues with confusion, doubt, and a growing fear they didn't quite understand. The human had passed not one but two of the galaxy's greatest trials, not through strength or force, but through quiet reason and choices that made no sense to those raised in a world where power always decided worth. In polished dining halls, and behind shimmering energy curtains, dignitaries from the great houses leaned in to murmur about the human who knelt to a flame instead of claiming it, the man who didn't seek fame yet had drawn the eyes of Princess Talira again and again. Some said it was a trick, that Earth had secretly evolved hidden talents, or that Elias was a weapon in disguise. Others believed he was just lucky, but no one could explain why the princess, proud and careful, seemed so interested in one plain man among so many shining giants. In the court's inner garden, where trees glowed softly and alien birds sang songs only nobles could hear, Talira stood beneath a floating blossom when a royal attendant whispered that Elias had arrived. She turned without hesitation, waving the guards away, and invited him into her private chamber, a move that shocked even her advisers, who watched through hidden lenses with wide eyes. Inside, the room was simple by royal standards, filled with calm light and quiet music that played from living walls, and Talira stood in silence for a moment before asking, not as a princess, but as a person, "What do your people dream of?" "Commander Wren?" Elias was quiet for a long time and then said, "A place where we're not always the last ones in the room." His voice was steady, but the weight behind his words stirred something in her. She asked more questions about Earth, about war, about fear and hope, and he answered them without polish or performance, just the plain truth. And when she laughed softly at one of his awkward stories about human diplomacy gone wrong, the moment lingered longer than either expected. Outside that room, though, the whispers grew sharper. Court watchers saw too much in Talira's long gaze and Elias's steady presence, and not all of them liked it. In House Tharvin's black-tiled estate, Lord Vorn slammed his fist against a crystal table, demanding to know why the princess would waste her attention on a creature from a low-tier world. In the shadow hall of the Kalinari, silent watchers traded warnings. If Talira favored the human, everything could change: alliances, traditions, bloodlines. That night, cloaked figures met beneath the storm-lit balconies of the upper tower to speak of balance and purity, to plan a quiet removal, an accident no one would trace. Meanwhile, Elias sat alone in his assigned chamber, watching the stars. Through a clear wall, unaware that half the court now studied him like a threat. A soft knock came, and a messenger delivered a note sealed with the royal crest. "The princess requests your presence at the reflection chamber." Curious, he went, escorted through quiet halls and whispering corridors where servants paused to stare. The chamber was round and filled with floating glass orbs, each showing moments from Talira's life, her training, her speeches, her private struggles. She stood beside one and asked Elias a question no one else would dare. "What do you think I should do if I don't believe in the old ways anymore?" Elias didn't offer advice like a politician, didn't flatter or avoid the truth. He said, "Do what's right, not what's expected. That's what leaders are for." She looked at him for a long time, and something inside her shifted. But outside, in the shadows of the court, enemies moved. Plans were forming. The whispers turned into schemes. Not everyone wanted the human to speak with the princess again, and some had already chosen to make sure he wouldn't. The moonless night over Veltraxis cast the palace in deep shadows as the wind stirred through the narrow stone paths of the upper courts, where silence ruled and nothing moved except the twin statues guarding the Hall of Echoes. Nothing, that is, except the assassins. They came without sound, cloaked in phase suits that bent light and heat, their blades hidden and their hearts trained for this one task: remove the human quietly, cleanly, without alerting the princess or the rest of the court. Elias ran, unaware of the danger curling around him like smoke, sat alone in the meditation garden behind his chamber, looking at the stars and trying to make sense of everything he had seen since arriving. He didn't belong here, not in the golden halls or on the tournament lists, yet every choice he made only seemed to pull him deeper into the mystery, especially now that the princess, who could have picked any champion in the galaxy, seemed to seek not just his insight, but his company. The shadows crept closer. One assassin moved through the koi stream without disturbing the water. Another hovered above in the tree canopy, her blade already drawn. A third circled behind, counting breaths until the signal. Then, without a whisper, they struck. The first blade came down, meant for Elias's neck, but missed by chance or instinct. He leaned forward at that exact moment, reaching for a small flower that had reminded him of Earth. The second strike came from the tree, but Elias rolled, the blade grazing his side. He grabbed a broken branch and swung it without thinking, knocking one attacker backward into the stream. They were fast-trained killers from House Tharvan, sworn to eliminate threats to the balance of the court, and Elias was just a man with no armor, no weapons, and no backup. Yet he kept moving, ducking under a swipe, kicking off a wall, turning. Defense and to escape. His side burned, but he stayed calm, counting their moves, watching their patterns. He didn't need to overpower them. He just needed to stay alive. The palace guards were always nearby, but the assassins had jammed signals and sound. No one would come. One assassin caught his arm, raised a blade, but Elias grabbed a metal lantern and smashed it against the attacker's mask, sending shards flying and sparks into the dry leaves. Flames burst to life, smoke rising. Alarms would come now, even if sound was blocked. The distraction gave him just enough time to break away, racing through the garden toward the inner wall. But the third assassin blocked him, moving like a ghost, and Elias knew he couldn't outrun them all. So he stopped, took a breath, and turned to face the silent killer. "I'm not your enemy," he said, voice firm but steady. The assassin hesitated, not because of the words, but because of the way Elias stood, not like a fighter, but like someone ready to die with dignity. Before the blade could fall, a brilliant flash lit the sky, and a pulse cannon roared from the left. The assassin fell backward, stunned, as royal guards swarmed in. Talira herself appeared moments later, wrapped in a deep violet cloak, her eyes blazing with fury. "Who sent them?" she demanded, but Elias shook his head. "They didn't say a word. They were trained too well." She stepped closer, seeing the blood on his arm, and her voice softened. "You could have died." Elias looked around at the burning garden, the stunned assassins, the faces of frightened nobles peering from distant balconies. "I almost did," he said, "and I think someone wanted that very badly." Talira turned to her captain. "Find out who ordered this." No matter their rank, the captain bowed, already moving. As dawn broke, the court buzzed with panic and questions. How had assassins entered the royal grounds? Who wanted the human dead? And why was Talira, daughter of the High King, so fiercely protective of a man from Earth? In the shadows, more than one noble clenched their teeth. The plan had failed. The human was still alive, and worse, now he had the sympathy of the people and the attention of the princess like never before. But one thing had changed. Elias Wren, who had once felt like a visitor in this strange world, now understood the truth. Someone feared him, someone powerful, and they wouldn't stop until he was gone. The sky over Veltraxis turned a strange shade of gold as storm clouds formed unnaturally fast, rolling in with a quiet threat that made birds vanish and guards grip their weapons tighter, while in the shadowed corners of the palace something old and dangerous began to stir. The Blood Oath Rebellion, long thought a myth, now moving silently through the courts with purpose and fury. Sworn centuries ago by the noble house Tharvan and a secret circle of highborn allies, the oath promised that no outsider, especially no human, would ever sit near the throne. And now, with Elias Wren still alive after the assassination attempt, and the princess herself defying tradition to protect him, the rebels saw their moment to strike. They moved fast, locking down halls, turning servants into spies, bribing guards to vanish at key posts, and preparing to unleash chaos before the final trial began. Elias, still recovering from his wounds, sat quietly in his chamber when a soft chime came from the door, not a knock, but the emergency signal used only by palace security. And when he opened it, he found not a soldier but Sira, the six-eyed tactician who had once doubted him, now breathless and urgent. "They're coming," she whispered, stepping in and sealing the door with a quick code. "It's not just assassins now. It's a rebellion. The blood oath has been activated." Elias didn't fully understand, but he listened as she explained that several noble houses had joined forces to force Talira to step down, or worse, disappear entirely, and the trigger for it all was him. "They believe you've corrupted her judgment," she said. "They think you're trying to take control of the throne through her." Elias frowned. "That's not true." "They don't care," Cyril replied. "They only care that she listens to you." Moments later, an explosion rocked the eastern court. Smoke rose, alarms screamed, and Elias felt the floor vibrate beneath his feet. The rebellion had begun. Talira was in danger, and every loyal guard was either dead, missing, or surrounded. Serail handed Elias a small device. "This leads to a secret passage. It'll get you to the Hall of Stars. Should be there." Without hesitation, Elias followed the narrow tunnel, running through flickering light and stale air, mind racing not with fear, but with purpose. He had never asked for power, never wanted to be a symbol, but now lives depended on him, and something inside had changed. When he reached the Hall of Stars, he found it under siege. Rebel soldiers in red armor fired into the high glass towers, and Talira stood inside with a shield around her, trying to protect a group of children, the heirs of several peaceful houses who had been brought there for safety. Elias didn't stop to think. He used a dropped energy lance to draw fire, luring 2 rebels away, then tackled one, knocking his helmet loose and disabling his suit with a power surge. The other fired but missed, and Elias used the distraction to break into the hall, rolling behind a pillar as glass shattered above him. Talira saw him, and her eyes widened. "You shouldn't be here," she cried. "You're the reason they're doing this." "Then let me be the reason they fail," Elias said, grabbing a fallen guard's shield and running toward her. Together, they covered the children and fought their way to the emergency lift, rising toward the safety of the central spire. But even there, rebels waited. The leader, Lord Vorn, stepped forward, blood oath symbol glowing on his chest, blade drawn. "You've betrayed your blood, Talira," he said coldly. "You would give our future to a species barely worthy of life." Talira stood firm. "I would give it to someone who chose peace when he could have taken power, who saw unity when others only saw rank." Elias didn't speak. He just watched Vorn, calculating every move. Then, at the right moment, he activated the shield pulse on his wrist, sending out a blinding flash that gave Talira the opening she needed to strike, not with a blade, but with her voice. "By ancient law, I declare the rebellion broken," she said, and activated a royal beacon that lit the skies. Across the palace, loyalists rose, emboldened by her words, and the rebels began to fall. Vorn lunged, but Elias met him mid-strike, grappling with strength born of survival, not training, and with a final push sent the rebel crashing into the wall, stunned. The rebellion fell within the hour. The palace was scarred, the court shaken, but the throne still stood, and beside it now stood a human. The nobles who survived looked at Elias with different eyes, now not just confusion or suspicion, but a reluctant respect. He had fought not for a crown, but for someone he believed in. And though the trials were not yet over, everyone knew something had changed. The court had tried to kill the human. He had saved them instead. The fires from the rebellion had been put out, the broken glass swept from the palace floors, and the rebels either locked away or exiled to the far moons. But though the halls of Veltraxis now stood quiet, a deeper tension still hummed in the air, because the time had come for the final trial, the ceremony of binding, where the victor of the crucible would be granted their reward, not gold or land, but something far greater, the right to stand at the side of the heir to the throne. And all across the galaxy, people watched in silence as the moment approached, confused and intrigued by what many still could not understand for the human. Elias Wren had not only survived every impossible challenge, he had earned something far rarer respect. Inside the grand chamber, surrounded by towering columns of light and ancestral statues older than any Earth civilization, Princess Talira stood in her ceremonial robes, her face calm, her eyes clear, though her heart beat like a distant drum. As she waited for Elias to step forward, and when he did, wearing no armor, no crown, just a simple dark tunic and the medal given to him after the rebellion, the room filled with whispers, the kind that carry through history. The nobles expected this to be a formality, a polite moment before tradition returned to normal. But what they did not know was that Talira had made a private decision, one that would soon shake the stars. The High Chancellor read the ancient lines asking Elias if he accepted the honor, if he would bind himself to Voltraxis, to its future, to its people and its princes. And though the words were old, Elias took a moment before answering, because he wasn't just thinking about the princes. He was thinking about Earth, about every outsider who'd ever been told they were less, about every hand he'd seen raised in fear, every door closed to humans like him. And then he looked up straight into Talira's eyes and said, "No." The chamber fell silent. For one breathless moment even the statues seemed to pause. Elias continued, his voice steady, not loud but strong enough to carry through the echoing chamber. "I cannot accept the reward, not because I don't value it, but because this was never about being chosen. It was about showing that we could stand together, that a human could survive your trials, not to be crowned, but to be heard." A wave of shock swept through the court. Some gasped. Others whispered angrily. But Talira didn't flinch. She smiled, faintly, as if she had known he would say it. And then, stepping down from her platform, she walked to Elias and took his hand, not as a ruler, but as an equal. "Then I choose," she said softly but clearly, so that every noble, every broadcast, every listening world could hear. "Not a title, not a tradition, but a person. I choose Elias Wren, not as a reward, but as a partner in what comes next." Her words shattered centuries of order. The council erupted in debate, voices rising, but the people watching from across the stars heard something different. They saw a leader choosing with her heart, not her bloodline. They saw a human, once mocked, now standing beside royalty, not because he took power, but because he refused it. In the days that followed, challenges came from every corner of the noble houses. Petitions, threats, even diplomatic insults from other worlds. But Talira did not back down. Neither did Elias. They traveled together to the war-torn edge colonies, to refugee moons, to forgotten cities once abandoned by the throne, and everywhere they went, they listened, they acted, and they gave those without voice a chance to speak. Soon, the title of outsider no longer meant weak or strange. It meant something new, something strong. The stars began to shift. Treaties were signed between Earth and the royal houses. New councils formed. Education opened to all species. And when the historians wrote of this moment, they didn't call it a coronation. They called it the choice that echoed across the stars. And at the center of it all stood a quiet human from a blue planet, who refused the throne and changed the galaxy instead.